Okay. Well, I'm here in Hungary. I arrived here. Oh, you're if you just mute it. I got here on Friday, and a few hours after I arrived, the Hungarian government announced that they were closing their borders. I mean, literally, I arrived around, I don't know, 11 a.m. or something. And then around 4 p.m., they announced that they were closing their borders to foreigners. So we'll see what happens. I'm definitely in a very nice place and good company. So I'd be happy to be here for an extended stay. But we'll see. Maybe my flight will be able to go, maybe not. You know, I'll find out next week.
All employed by the devotees there to keep you there. They have some sway with the government.
Okay. Okay. Well, I guess we'll start. Ramananda Prabhu is joined us now. Sangha. Dandavad. And we're coming now to the end of this month of Hari Smadan. Yesterday was Jiva Goswami's Divine Appearance Day. We had a meeting with the devotees in Australia yesterday. So we had some nice remembrance of Srila Jiva Goswami and his divine glories. And also yesterday was the Divine Appearance Day of Vamana Dev. So we're also remembering that, and the wonderful example of Bali Maharaj and his surrender to the Lord, his expression of Atma Nivedanam. And now today, very exciting day. Dayavati, Devi, Dasi, Dandavad, welcome from Tijuana. Today is super exciting day. It is the Divine Appearance Day of Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur. And I watched some of Goswami Maharaj's class this morning, and he started out with a very nice point that, you know, there's several persons who we sometimes attribute to being like the indispensable person without whom we wouldn't be here. You know, so like we'll sometimes say that about Srila Swami Maharaj Prabhupada, because he's the one who brought this to the West. He's the one who opened the door. He's the one who gave us a connection with Srila Govinda Maharaj and Srila Sridhar Maharaj. But then on the other hand, it was Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur who inspired Srila Swami Maharaj to go to the West. And also Srila Saraswati Thakur, who started the engine moving, who started the Western preaching, who you know, created an explosion within India. So also Saraswati Thakur, we think of him in that way. But actually, the original the original person who really holds that position is Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur. You know, he's the one who revived Mahaprabhu's movement in modern times. He's the one who started the first renaissance of Mahaprabhu's movement, and he also sent the first how can we say, you know, like the tester, the test bombs into the Western world. You know, he sent life and precepts of you know, Lord Chaitanya to McGill University in Canada. He also sent some copies of that to some prominent Western writers, like the American poet Emerson. He sent him a copy of that, and he appreciated that. So he started that movement into the West. He started the Renaissance within India. And he also, and And what is referred to by Srila Sridhar Maharaj as his primary and greatest gift is that he gave us Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. You know, Saraswati Thakur was the one who fulfills the vision, the desire of Bhakti Vinod Thakur. Saraswati Thakur was the one who created the revolution that was necessary to really spread Mahaprabhu's teachings and represent it in all its glory and dignity. And it was Bhakti Vinod Thakur who made the call for Saraswati Thakur to appear in this world. And also Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he predicted, it was his prediction in modern times. You know, Mahaprabhu, he also mentioned this in it's recorded in Chaitanya Bhagavat, that famous expression, Priti Vityache Jatanagara Digram Sarvacha Prachar Hoibe Mornam, that throughout every town and village, my name will be chanted, will be spread, will be preached. So Mahaprabhu made that initial prediction. And then Bhakti Vinod Thakur, fast forward several hundred years later, he reiterated that. And he said more specifically, within 50 years, you're going to see this happening. Within 50 years. My computer, I just want to lift it. It's like I'm looking down at it. Yesterday in Australia, so embarrassing, they have their screen like really high up on the wall, so everyone's like looking up with like craning their necks. like what is this, like some like funny, like I don't know, like Catholic church type setup, like yo, you want to change it? Oh, that's plenty, that's too much. Then I'll be craning my neck. Okay, that's better. So Bhakti Vinod Thakur, you know, he made that call and invited, you know, he made that earnest request for the descent of Srila Saraswati Thakur in the same way that Advaita Acharya, he performs that function of inviting, you know, earnestly requesting Mahaprabhu to descend to this world. So it was Bhakti Vinod Thakur, you know, who performed that function of making that call, you know, and he prayed to the Lord, please send one of your own men, you know, I can't do this on my own. And Srila Gurudev, he would always reference this verse from this wonderful song, the Acharya Vandana, which we normally sing on the appearance day of Srila Saraswati Thakur, Jaya Re Jaya Jaya Paramahamsa Mahashaya, this very beautiful song, which it was composed. What's very surprising is it wasn't even composed by a disciple of Saraswati Thakur. He was from another mission, another lineage, I'm not sure, but he somehow came in connection with some of the disciples of Saraswati Thakur and was so impressed and formed such a vivid impression of the character and the mission of Saraswati Thakur that he was able to write this extraordinary song, which, you know, as Gurudev said on many occasions, represents the very gist of Saraswati Thakur's preaching movement. But in one of the last verses, it's the penultimate verse, he glorifies Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur. The whole song, it's a long song. It takes 20, 30 minutes to sing. And then at the end, he glorifies Bhakti Vinod Thakur, recognizing who Bhakti Vinod Thakur is and that he was the one who brought Saraswati Thakur here. Thakur Shi, how does it go? Shri Gauranga Padisha Thakur Bhakti Vinod Dina Hina Patitera Bandhu Ani Lena Avanite Toma Akalanka Purna Indu Ani Lena Avanite. I'm missing one line, one phrase, but he acknowledges, he glorifies Bhakti Vinod Thakur as being Shri Gauranga Padishad, an eternal associate of Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and that he, you know, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he is Dina, Hina, Pati Tera, you know, the Deen and the Heen and the Pati, you know, that's us, you know, Deen and Heen and Pati. Today, this evening, we were just singing some of Bhakti Vinod Thakur's songs, and then I came to Amara Jivan, and I was just like, oh no, I can't sing this right now, because it's so Deen and Heen and Pati, you know, meaning, you know, poor and fallen, downtrodden, conditioned souls like ourselves. So, you know, in songs like Amara Jivam, Bhakti Vinod Thakur is so perfectly representing our position. And so, you know, his heart, you know, Dina Hina Pati Tera Bandhu, means he's their best friend. You know, he's, as Gurudev would say, you know, the melted heart of Bhakti Vinod Thakur, who was full of so much compassion for the plight of souls like myself. And so he brought Ani Lena Avashite. He brought you here. He's directly addressing Saraswati Thakur in the song. He brought you here. And then Toma Akalanka, Port Indian, you descended here like the full moon, this bright full moon in this dark sky. So, you know, this is Bhakti Vinod Thakur's wonderful gift. And then also Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he also made this point in one of his verses. He has there's a verse at the beginning of Sharanagati, which, you know, like so many of Srila Sridhar Maharaj's verses, just extraordinarily, very concisely expresses the gist of who Bhakti Vinod Thakur was, what his gift was in one verse, you know, Guru Dam, Grantha Dam, Gora Damadam, Bhakti Dam, Namadam, Buri Dam, Vande Bhakti Vinoda Kamsada, or he's Dam means, you know, given. So he's listing all these things that Bhakti Vinod Thakur has given in his preface to his commentary on Sharanagati. And so the first thing he mentions is Guru Dam. You gave us our Guru, Saraswati Thakur. You know, Saraswati Thakur, he is, you know, he's our Guru. He's, you know, not just he's Srila Sridhar Maharaj's Guru. He's Guru to all of us. And in our Srila Govinda Maharaj, he's mentioned that in our way of practice, in our application of Mahaprabhu's teachings, we don't look beyond Saraswati Thakur. So you just put it on mute. We don't look past Saraswati Thakur. So he's really our guru. He's the guru of our lineage in modern times. And Bhakti Vinod Thakur gave us to him. And then Grantha Dam, you know, he gave us scripture. He revived Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and he wrote his own commentaries on them in line with Mahaprabhu's teachings and the teachings of the Goswamis. And he also gave original scripture in the form of his own writings. And he, you know, Gurudev has compared him to Vyasadeva, you know, in the way that Vyasadeva, you know, presented, you know, huge, vast ocean of literature covering a very broad spectrum, you know. So Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he did something very similar to that. And also another similarity there, Srila Gurudev mentioned, is that Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he was a grihasta, and he was somewhat limited in what he could do. And so therefore he needed Saraswati Thakur, who was his own son. You know, he prayed for this descent of a great Mahajan, and so his Saraswati Thakur appeared in response to that as his own son, and it was his son, Saraswati Thakur, who, you know, put into action, who fully manifested his vision and his desire and what he had initiated and begun to put into action. Srila Saraswati Thakur, he fully fulfilled that. And so similarly, in the case of Srila Veda Vyas, he was somewhat limited. I mean, not exactly that he was a grihasta, but he had mixed with the world. He had a son, so he was limited in what he could present, in what would be fully accepted by others from him. And he understood he could not give Krishna Lila to the world. He could not present Krishna Lila as being the summum bonum that would have to come from someone else. And so it was his own son, Shukadev, who was known as being perfectly situated in Brahma Gyan, completely removed from anything of this world. He realized it was his own son, Shukadev, who could do that, and Shukadev was the one who did that. So there's this parallel here between Bhakti Vinod Thakur and Srila Vyasadeva. So Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he revived many scriptures, previous scriptures, also Upadeshamrita is another one. Upadeshamrita was practically lost, and Bhakti Vinod Thakur found a copy and published it again, put it into circulation. And then he also gave so many of his own writings, and in such an expansive way, in so many different languages, in English, Bengali, Hindi, Tamil, Persian also, is completely extraordinary. And also another point, very nice point that Srila Gurudev made was that he, in his writings, he wasn't just writing in one style to one audience, but he adopted many different styles so that he could connect with many different, different, demographics or different groups of persons. And some of, you look at some of his English poetry, and you'll just never, it sounds like it's written by a British man in Victorian England. And you just would never believe this is written by a Bengali, living in Puri. You just wouldn't believe that. So it's very extraordinary. And Gurudev mentioned some examples that he wrote some of his books, some of his writings, they were like kind of in the style which would be appreciated more by Western-minded, scientifically minded persons. And he mentioned Chaitanya Shikshamrita as an example of that. And then he also wrote texts which would appeal more to persons of more of a traditional Vedic, Indian minds. And he mentioned Jaiva Dharma as an example of that. And then also Gurudev said, and for the fallen souls, for the uneducated persons like ourselves, Gurudev said very humbly, for the village people, then he wrote so many songs. And it's such a powerful, it's a simultaneously simple and yet powerful way to connect with people, because it's so organic. And it's, it's part of the culture. We see in any traditional culture, even in modern culture, there's a very strong tradition of song, but especially like in village life, people, not just in, I've seen also in China, there's also a strong tradition. I think any traditional culture in Hungary, there's a tradition in villages. The people will get together. They didn't have TVs and all these distractions. The people will actually get together and talk and sing together. So it's very integral to that type of, communal life. So like, what better way to integrate, Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu, with the daily lives of so many persons. And, you know, when we're in Bengal and you hear the Bengalis singing these songs, and it's just so natural to them, you know, and they're going about their daily business sometimes, or performing some services, some duties, and they're singing these songs. It's their language. It's really like, you see how it's really taken a hold of their hearts, because it's so close to them, it's so near to them, and it's just, singing is so natural. And those songs, you know, they're, you know, apparently they're very simple and they're very sweet, but as Gurudev has pointed out, and Srila Sridhar revealed in his Lagu Chandrika Bhashya, there's so much scripture, there's so much siddhanta behind all of these, like, you know, apparently simple expressions. And so in Srila Sridhar's commentary in Sharanagati, you see how he's, you know, he's like showing revealing the scriptural reference behind so many of the expressions of Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur. So there's so much, it's very digestible, you know, like if you look at some of his writings, like one in particular, the Prasadam prayers that we sing, you know, Shodira Vijajal, like we sing that, like, okay, some of the songs like Amada Jivan, which are a bit heavy, we sing them in a sober tune, so it's, you know, somehow it matches a bit, but some of them, like especially this Prasadam song that we sing it in this very like kind of upbeat, you know, and some countries I go to, they've adopted their own tunes that they sing this song with. I won't mention where, but one place in particular, they have this very like kind of jaunty beat to it. It's very like catchy tune. But if you look at the words, you look at the meaning, you know, like this body is a net of ignorance, you know, which is dragging us into the ocean of the senses, and it's very intense. but having it in this form, in this expression of a sweet song, it makes it so much more digestible, you know, like you're taking your medicine in a sugar, with some sugar candy or something like that, you know, so very easy to go down. So, you know, everywhere we're finding Bhakti Vinod Thakur. Gurudev mentioned how before he joins the Math, because he grew up in a family of Gaudiya Vaishnavas. It was his culture, it was his bread and butter. And so he was very familiar with you know, with the teachings, with the culture. But he mentioned that Narottam Thakur was number one he said he was head of the songs department. And then when he came and joined the Math, then that position was given to Bhakti Vinod Thakur. And one nice point that I heard today in the class I listened to was that Srila Sridhar, he commented that Narottam Thakur, of course we don't really know this because we don't look at those other books, those other song collections, but most of Narottam Thakur's songs, Srila Sridhar commented, they were on the Siddha platform. They're for, you know, higher souls. They're concerned more with you know, more evolved souls and dealing with higher subjects like pastimes between Radha Krishna, and then a smaller percentage there for the conditioned souls like ourselves. Whereas with Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he's so merciful, it's the opposite. And so most of his songs are for us, and then a smaller amounts, they are dealing with more elevated subject matter. And so we see that when we look at Sharanagati, you know, most of the songs, they are very accessible, very relatable for us, and very safe for us. And you know, dealing with the limbs of surrender, Sharanagati. but then at the end of the book, there are a few songs. There's a section, Bhajana Lalasa, I think it's called, which is expressing a mood which is meaningful for the higher souls. He's so merciful, Bhakti Vinod Thakur. Another nice point that Srila Gurudev made is that Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he was, and it's also instructive, I feel it's a very instructive point for ourselves, that Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he was extremely broad and accommodating and expansive in his preaching style, and we just mentioned so many examples of that. And he was trying to make the teachings accessible for persons of so many different mentalities. But at the same time, Srila Gurudev pointed out his own inner bhajan, his own inner world of service, of divine worship. It was very, very exclusive. And in particular, Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he felt great affinity for the worship of Shri Shri Gaur Gadadhar, for the worship of Mahaprabhu and Gadadhar together, as the expression of Shri Shri Radha Krishna and Gaur Leela. And this is a very fine and high exclusive conception, and it's something that we at our current stage we keep something of a distance from, because it's very easy to misunderstand, and there are many who do. So we keep some distance from that. We pay our dandavat to that. But that was the worshipable deity of Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, and those deities were worshipped at his place of his Bhajan Kutir in Gojumadweep in Navadvip. And there was one occasion when somebody they asked Gurudev, or they made a suggestion or something about why didn't we worship deities of Gaur Gadadhar in that temple in the Govinda Kund in our lot in Navadvip. And Gurudev, he said, that is the private chamber of bhajan of Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur. That worship of Gaur Gadadhar is the private chamber of bhajan of Bhakti Vinod Thakur. So his worship is so refined, so high, so exclusive that we don't approach that worship at present. But that was his most cherished, his Ishta Devata, most cherished deity and form of worship. But then, as we said, at the same time, he was so broad in his approach to distributing this to the world. And I feel it's a very instructive point for ourselves, that, because it's very easy to go too much either side. I mean, in terms of, I'm not saying we're all going to worship Gaur Gadadhar. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that in terms of our own personal practice and personal cultivation, we need to give attention to that, because it's easy, if in our attempts, in our inspiration to try to share and distribute to others, and the need to dilute things a little bit, it's easy to get sucked into that too much, and to lose sight of the importance of maintaining our own, inner spiritual integrity and purity, and to maintain our own progressive characteristic in spiritual life. It's very easy to lose sight of that, when on the other hand, we're also trying to simplify things. We're trying to connect with many others on their grounds. So we have to do, and then on the other hand, there are those who just like to very vigidly keep everything extremely pure, are very Puritan in their approach, and they don't want to accommodate. They don't want to soften their approach for others. So they're maintaining their own like very strict style of practice and cultivation, but they're not able to accommodate and share that, extend that with others. Of course, that is a safer approach. If we had to choose between the two, we have to save ourselves before we can save others. But ideally, I mean, in the mood that we see from our gurus, especially Bhakti Vinod Thakur and Gurudev, there are different moods. Saraswati Thakur had another mood. Srila Sridhar Maharaj had another mood. There's different moods, but ultimately we're disciples of Srila Govinda Maharaj, and we also see in the environment that we're in this modern world that we're in now, there is some need to try to adjust things to some extent in order to attract and accommodate different persons. And this is another interesting point, the difference between Saraswati Thakur and Bhakti Vinod Thakur. Because Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he's known for how accommodating and how generous and how accepting he was. And Saraswati Thakur was just the opposite. Gurudev, in one talk I heard of Gurudev the other day, he was saying about Jiva Goswami, he was comparing Jiva Goswami and Saraswati Thakur and saying how Saraswati Thakur, he would not give 1 inch of space in the spiritual world to anybody else. Wouldn't give 1 inch of space, nothing, And that there's that famous example which really highlights this contrast between Saraswati Thakur and Bhakti Vinod Thakur, that occasion when there was this big Babaji who came from a Sahajiya lineage, and he came to meet with Bhakti Vinod Thakur. And that also shows like how accommodating Bhakti Vinod Thakur was, just the fact that he would allow him to meet with him. And Gurudev mentioned, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he wasn't making a pretense about who he was. Bhakti Vinod Thakur was very clear, like, this is my line, this is my ideal. We have differences. He was very clear about that. But he was so sweet and so gentle in the way that he presented this, that persons like that, they still feel comfortable and happy to come and cultivate friendship with Bhakti Vinod Thakur. And also another point is that Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he was very prominent in society. He had some position. And so there were persons who liked to just be seen with him. Bhakti Vinod Thakur, really it's extraordinary. Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he was employed by the British government. Like he was a Bengali man, in the early 1900s, who was employed as a magistrate by the British government. Like that's something quite impressive. It's very impressive, and he was very trusted by the British government. And he was, highly educated. He was very good friends with the brother of Rabindranath Tagore. So he was really like mixing with the upper echelon of society. And so sometimes persons like to visit him just, so they can say, oh yeah, I visited him, something like that. So there was that occasion when this one Babaji, I don't remember his name, but he visited Bhakti Vinod Thakur and they're having some discussion. And then Saraswati Thakur is a young boy at that time, maybe 8 years old, something like that. And the tradition in India, up until recently, I don't know how much I'm sure it still happens in more traditional areas in India, but the tradition in India always was that when the children wake up, the first thing they'll do is go and pay their respect, pay their obeisance, their dandavat to their parents. The parents are revered. And so Saraswati Thakur, every morning he would do that. First thing, he'll go and pay his respects. But then on that one morning, he came towards his father, and he saw that his father was with this Babaji. And so he gave his obeisance from a great distance, and he carried on his way. And Saraswati Thakur, of course, he was very bright, effulgent, very, very intelligent looking boy. And so that Babaji was very impressed just to see his figure from a distance. And he inquired from Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, who is that boy? So bright, what a bright boy. And Bhakti Vinod Thakur said, oh, that is my son. Oh, why he's keeping such a big distance from you? And, well, he's taken a vow that he won't come within 100 feet of the Sahajya. And you are a Paka Sahajya, you are first class Sahajya. He was very straightforward about it. So he's not coming too close. And so from that day, that man could understand, oh, this boy, he's going to be trouble for us in the future. He's going to create problems for us. So they had this this difference in their mood, in their approach. And of course, as we know, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he appeared at a time when Mahaprabhu's conception had become very polluted, very degraded. There was some type of scholar or something, I can't remember his name, but he identified 13 different groups, Uppa Sampradayas, groups who, in the name of Mahaprabhu, were actually grossly misrepresenting his conception. So things were kind of a mess, and the general, educated, pious society, they thought very lowly of the Vaishnavas, because Mahaprabhu, he, on one level, Mahaprabhu is seen as a social revolutionary because he rejected the caste system. Not what is that famous? Naham Vipro Nachanar Patir Napi Vaishya. Famous verse in Mahaprabhu where he's like denying all the designations of the Varnashram system. I'm not a Brahmin, not a Kshatriya, not a Shudra, etc. Mahaprabhu embraced everyone and gave the gift of divine love and the holy name to everyone, regardless of their birth and their breeding, which was, something of a taboo in society. And still today, we look at the Jagannath temple, they don't allow everyone to enter. So it was quite revolutionary what Mahaprabhu did. But then another way that persons will paint that picture is that, oh, the bums and the dropouts, they join Mahaprabhu's group. the people who can't get a job, who are rejected by everybody else, they join. Yeah, we understand, we get it. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj mentioned that his own father had that kind of mentality. And he was very, very disappointed that Srila Sridhar Maharaj was going in that direction. That was his idea. That, the low class people who don't, the misfits, no, they're the ones who join Mahaprabhu's group. His father was a Smarta Brahmin, I believe, and they're very strict about, so many Vedic practices and following in a very particular way. So, Mahaprabhu's mood of it's all about, the prema dharma, the religion of divine love, and it's all about love and peace. That was very against, it's very against their conception and their approach. So this was the problem, because there's this spaciousness in the practice of the prema dharma, that the emphasis is on the cultivation of a particular mood and heart, then it's easy to exploit that. And that's what happens. And, you know, like Gurudev mentioned, persons would sit for hours chanting the holy name, but in a hashish smoking party, you know, they're you know, smoking their hashish and taking the name. You know, there was no conception of pure practices. There was no conception of the pure name, of the name. There was no clear understanding of the name as existing beyond just a vibration that we can make with our tongues. That's another thing Srila Sridhar Maharaj mentions in that verse, Namadam, that he gave the name, he gave the conception of the pure name. You know, so what was I saying? Oh yeah, so there was, you know, there was some degradation, misrepresentation that took place within the, you know, so-called followers of Mahaprabhu. And then at the far end of the spectrum, there was, you know, how can we say, you know, very degraded practices, you know, where persons mixing like tantric practices with you know, the teachings of Mahaprabhu and the worship of Radha Krishna. So there were different ends of the spectrum, and there was a lot going on. And so, you know, as Gurudev would mention, many people, if someone came to their door, a Vaishnav, a follower, a Gaudiya Vaishnav came to the door begging for some alms, you know, they would, you know, receive them with disgust, you know, give them a little rice, throw them away, you know, we don't want to deal with them. So there's a very beautiful verse of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. Do you have a copy of Prapana Jina Namrita? You do, right? Srila Sridhar Maharaj wrote this extraordinary composition, which no doubt you're all familiar with, the Bhakti Vinod Thakur. And there's and one of the first verses there so brilliantly encapsulates this whole environment in which Bhakti Vinod Thakur appeared. Thank you, Devi. Find it here. So this is verse number 4 of the Bhakti Vinod Dashkam, which is in this wonderful book, in the back. At a time, maybe I'll read the Sanskrit as well. Or I'll try. Dharmas charmagato gatai. And you know, when we hear these verses, we remember Guru, because Gurudev could recite all these verses by heart so fluidly. I'll just mention as a side note, I'll never forget, there was one occasion, I think it was 2006, and that recording is on the Mott website, where it was this day, Bhakti Vinod Thakur's appearance day. And that morning, Gurudev, he wasn't available. Normally right after Arti, we'd all go and see Gurudev. But that morning he wasn't available. And so later on in the morning, I think it was around 8 o'clock, then I happened to be walking by and I saw Gurudev was sitting up in his chair, because there was a passageway where the ladies' rooms were that went past Gurudev's room, and you could kind of see through what was happening. So I saw he was sitting there, and so I thought, I'll go in and just pay my dandavat. And so I went in, and he was just like very spontaneously, he was beginning some glorification of Bhakti Vinod Thakur, and there were, just because it wasn't like planned and it wasn't at the normal time, there were only a few devotees. There were like 3 or 4 devotees there, and it's just such a profound moment. I just went in there quickly to give dandavats, then I sat there for the next 40 minutes as Gurudev, like this nectar was just pouring out of Gurudev's mouth. And you know, it was so, whenever Gurudev glorified Bhakti Vinod Thakur or any of the great devotees. It was just so natural. Like it was like he never had to prepare, or like me, I'm coming to give a talk about, I'm like feeling a little nervous, like I don't know what I'm going to say, But with Gurudev, it was just so natural, and it was like he was always living with them. They were living in his heart. And he mentioned this actually, once or twice he mentioned this, that, his approach was actually 2 or 3 times I heard him mention this point, at least, that he never took the historical approach. He always took went to the essence of what they gave and who they were. And he mentioned once some article of Srila Saraswati Thakur, ontology and morphology. One which is more of an external materialistic approach, and one which is dealing with the substance. And sometimes Gurudev would even be like kind of dismissive, like, oh, and there's so many details that you know about, and about his, what did he say? I can't remember. But like there's like a whole chronology of his life. He's like, there's so many details about that, and you can read that, or others can tell you, but I want to deal with what is the very essence of what he gave, and who he is. So it was always just so natural and so deeply substantial, any glorification, so spontaneous. But I remember on that occasion, he was chanting, as I said, just by heart. And these are very difficult Sanskrit verses, but very fluidly, he just, they were just rolling out. So I always think of him when I see these I hear his intonation in my head. But I'll just read this 4th verse. Dharmas charma gato yataiva satata yogas cha bhugatmaka yani shunya gatir japena tapasa kyatir jikam saiva cha dani dambikata nuraga bhajane dushta pacharoyada budim budi matambi veda hitada dacha bhavan preshitaha. At a time when religion was evaluated in terms of bodily relationship, and like this is referring to the Jati Gosais, persons, and they're still going today. In fact, we have some devotees who are part of those lineages. Like there's a line of Nityananda Prabhu, there's a line of Advaita Acharya, though they would worship persons on the basis of their, their birth. And so persons who were born into a very high family line, they would be worshipable to the society. So there's a lot of emphasis on this, blood connection. Whereas, in the line of pure devotion, of course, we'll give some honor to those persons, but substantially, we don't consider anything to be there. There was one occasion Goswami Maharaj mentioned when he was in London with Gurudev, and I believe it was a sister of Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur. It was published in the newspaper. She was visiting London. And of course, Goswami Maharaj, he knows all these things, but I guess he got a bit excited, like, we're in London, she's in London. And so he mentioned something to Gurudev, oh, like this relative of Bhakti Vinod Thakur is in London right now, we're in London. Maybe we could meet her. And Gurudev, very soberly, he responded, we are not interested in any blood connection. And there was a disciple, Saraswati Thakur, he had some disciples who came from these lines. And although substantially, he didn't give importance to that, sometimes those persons could be useful in the society because they, actually Saraswati Thakur, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, they come from a lower caste, they come from a Kayasta caste, which is, it's considered differently in different parts of India, but in some parts it's considered to be like a Shudra caste, the lowest caste. So for that reason, Saraswati Thakur may not have been given so much respect or credence in some situations. And so, some of his disciples were useful in negotiating certain difficult situations because of their position in society. And the most prominent is Bhakti Saranga Goswami Maharaj. He was in the line of Nityananda Prabhu, Nityananda Vamsha, and so he was highly revered by the general society. And so Saraswati Thakur sometimes would have him orchestrate or deal with some difficult situations. And actually there's some humor, some irony. Saraswati Thakur, he gave him the name of Prakrita. So I'm trying to think, what was his full name? He became Bhakti Saranga Goswami, but before that I'm not sure if Prakrita was like a title or if it was it may have actually been his initiated name, Prakrita. But there was some kind of humor there because, the word of Prakrita, it means looking mundane, but not mundane, right? So normally we refer to Krishna Lila as a Prakrita because it is human-like in its appearance, but is actually divine. So he gave this name to it's like a real jab at this like whole group of Jati Gosai people, saying like he appeared, like according to our conception, he appears mundane because he's a part of that whole group, that whole lineage, but he's actually not. It's very funny. So yeah, there were so many different groups that Bhakti Vinod Thakur and Saraswati Thakur had to contend with. And Saraswati Thakur, he came out as the fighter, and he was also fought and he was attacked. And Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he was more gentle in his approach. He worked with, Saraswati Thakur like initiated a whole like overhaul and created his own society, his own, he created a revolution. Whereas Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he worked within the existing society and he presented things, but he didn't like enforce it, and he didn't fight against, but he was standing for something pure and something brilliant and authentic. So anyway, we'll read this. At a time when religion was evaluated in terms of bodily relationship, saintliness was determined by ignorance. Like jnana, we say jnana shunya bhakti. So like, again, something that can really be exploited. Knowledge-free devotion. And yoga practice was motivated by sensual pleasure. When scholarship was cultivated just for voidism, meaning mayavad and personal conception, because like the educated people, they were attracted. They saw, the followers of Mahaprabhu, these bhakti people, they're kind of a mess, and they were naturally attracted to to the impersonal line of thought. So this was another thing which had to be dealt with. Scholarship was cultivated just for voidism. Japa was conducted for the sake of fame. And this is something that you see Saraswati Thakur really kind of hammered against. If you look in that song Vaishnava K, he's like really hammering this point about like artificially renouncing society, and practicing nirjan, bhajan, solitary practice, chanting so much japa. but without any real spiritual qualification to do that. So, that was an issue at the time. Japa was conducted for the sake of fame. Penance was performed out of vindictiveness. When charity was given out of pride, and on the pretext of spontaneous devotion, the most gross, sinful acts were perpetrated. And in all such anomalous situations, even the intelligentsia were at loggerheads with one another. At that very time, you were sent by the Almighty Creator. So, this was the situation, this was the environment in which Bhakti Vinod Thakur was preaching, was representing Mahaprabhu's conception. And the way that he made his approach is also very significant, because he was part of this whole, as you mentioned, this upper echelon, and this is part of his Leela, that he showed this development and this transition. Not that he just from the beginning was hailing Mahaprabhu and his line as supreme, but he showed as part of his Leela, for instructive purposes, this transition that took place. Because initially he was part of this whole group of the intelligentsia. And there were people who had their eyes on him. He was part of he was initially interested in this Brahmo group. They're very into scholarship. It's an impersonal conception. I don't know so much about it. Maybe some of you know more, but they have some type of a mix between Christianity and teachings of the Vedas. And there's a lot of emphasis on scholarship. And so Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he was for some time a part of this group, and he wrote articles for them. And he was there were persons who were excited about him. Oh, he's going to be like a new voice in our group. And then he made this transition. He came in connection with the teachings of Mahaprabhu, and he felt, he read Srimad Bhagavatam, and he felt, oh, there's something superior being given here. And he went through this whole, how can we say, there was a whole transition period that took place when he was questioning certain points of Mahaprabhu and really trying to establish, is this really the right path? Does this really make sense? And one of the points which he contemplated was that, and this is an important point, because one of the reasons Mahaprabhu appears in the figure of a sannyasi is in order to demonstrate the purity of Krishna Leela. Because, superficially speaking, according to mundane values, Krishna just appears like a mundane womanizer, right? He's an immoral man. So that, that makes it difficult for many persons to accept his position. And so, this is one of the reasons why Mahaprabhu, he was very strict as a sannyasi. Mahaprabhu wouldn't hear the name of a woman, and yet he was celebrating Krishna, known as a debauchee, as the supreme Godhead. So, because otherwise, Srila Srinivas commented, people can, if we're loose, and if the followers of Krishna are loose in their practices, then people say, oh yes, we understand, you are loose and immoral, and so your God is also loose and immoral. Yeah, we understand. So, people won't be able to appreciate the purity of what that is. And so for that reason, Mahaprabhu took that posture, took that role, and was very strict about upholding it. And so this was a point that Bhakti Vinod Thakur contemplated. Why is it that Mahaprabhu, he was this very strict sannyasi, and yet he was worshiping Krishna as the supreme divinity. Krishna who is everything we just described. And he meditated upon this, and he came to the conclusion that the realization that Mahaprabhu was Krishna. And that Mahaprabhu was Krishna appearing in order to demonstrate the purity of Krishna Lila. This was the realization that he came to. So, there were different thought processes he went through, which would, be helpful for others. And the fact that, he came from such a highly cultured and educated section of society, the fact that he, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he's as we said, a magistrate working for the British government, prominent in the upper section of society. The fact that he began, standing for Mahaprabhu's group and Krishna as the supreme Godhead, then people had to pay attention to that. They couldn't they can dismiss someone who's engaging in very sinful activity or just loose behavior, but someone of the stature of Bhakti Vinod Thakur, they had to sit up and pay attention. So he was perfectly situated to give a dignified voice to a dignified audience about who Mahaprabhu was. I went off track from that verse that Srila Srinivas, Gurudam, Grantadam, Goradam, he revealed Mahaprabhu's abode, as Rup and Sanat, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he's been celebrated as the seventh Goswami, in the same way that Rup and Sanatan revealed Vrindavan Dham and all its glory. So Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he revealed Navadvip Dham in all its glory. And he went to great lengths to locate, he took advantage of the facilities he had in his government job. And he went to great lengths, to taking, he had access to all these old historical records and maps. And so he was able to identify the exact spot of Mahaprabhu's appearance. And he, of course, as we know, invited Jagannath Das Babaji to come and verify that with his spiritual heart. And then he also established a committee to take care of the Dham. He also passed on that responsibility to Saraswati Thakur. And this is a point that is perhaps not so well known, but Saraswati Thakur initially went through a stage of being very withdrawn from society. And he just wanted to stay in Mayapur. And he is actually qualified to do Nirjan, Bhajan. And so that was initially Saraswati Thakur's inclination. But Bhakti Vinod Thakur had to push him, And the way that Gurudev expressed it, he said, if you will not, Bhakti Vinod Thakur told him, if you will not give your blood for Mahaprabhu, you will become a Mayavadi. So he had to push Saraswati Thakur to take that responsibility. So he also, not only for Navadvip, actually everything is a Navadvip, I shouldn't say it like that. But he organized like cleanups of other dhams, other holy pilgrimage sites throughout India. His work was very extensive. And he established a place of worship there at the place of Mahaprabhu's appearance, which Saraswati Thakur later developed. And then he gave us also Navadvip Mahatmya, where we were discussing this yesterday. he's tuning with his devotional heart. He's tuning in to that live stream of spiritual reality. You know, Nityananda Prabhu taking Jiva Goswami around Navadip Dham. You know, he's tuning into that, and then he's revealing that for the benefit of all of our lowly selves. So Gurudam, Grantadam, Goradam, Dam, Namadam, as we mentioned, he gave the pure conception of the name. He emphasized the necessity of approaching the name in a pure way, with pure practices and with proper understanding of the divine nature of the name. He, in that song, it's getting late now. It's very difficult, you know, because, you know, how Bhakti Vinod Thakur, there's just so much to say. But in, you know, for example, it's the very last song of Sharanagati, Nam Mahatmya, I believe is the title. And he describes the real process of connecting with the real name. And there's that particular line which Gurudev and Srila Sridhar Maharaj would quote, Jivar vete chole, hridaya hoite bole, Jivar, nache. Words, but just this song is describing how you know, the name will first enter the ear, coming from the mouth of the pure sadhu. The name will enter the ear, will come to the plane of our heart, and then at the right time, when the space is, you know, suitable, then the name will be inspired to dance. And hridaya hoite bole, then forcefully the name will come from the heart to the tongue, not the other way around, because this is sahaja conception, from the tongue to the heart, that by some movement in this physical plane we can create spiritual substance. But it's just the opposite, that from the plane of consciousness, out of some real genuine heart connection, the name will reveal himself within the plane of sound. And then Shabda Rupe Nache Anukan. Then the name in the form of sound will dance on our tongue. And then not that we will chant the name, but the name will chant us. Not that we are the subject and the name is an object to us, but the other way around. The name is the subject, we are an object to that name. So this, you know, this is what Bhakti Vinod Thakur gave, you know, this pure, proper understanding of the name. Not that we can just sit and make some show that we're chanting so many thousands of names, imitating Haridas Thakur and others, and we're gonna like actually get somewhere in our spiritual lives. But you know, the approach has to be first through service, through self-giving, and in the proper channel, connecting with the genuine agent. And then when the name feels, as Gurudev said, here is my dancing stage, then the name will reveal himself and he will chant us. You know, we will become objects to that divine name. So Namadam, he gave the name. Bhakti Dham, he gave the conception of pure devotion. And then Buridam, the last expression in this verse of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, which means literally something like he gave such an abundance. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj explains that, you know, this can be understood to be a reference to Radha Dasyam, you know, which is his ultimate gift. And this is what Srila Sridhar Maharaj in what is the most celebrated verse in this Bhakti Vinod Viraha Dashakam, there Srila Sridhar Maharaj is highlighting that point. Shri Gauranuma, this is like the 8th verse or something like that in that composition. Shri Gauranuma Surupa Viditam Rupa Graje Nadritam Rupa Jai Parideshitam Daguganer Ashwaditam Sevitam Jiva Jaya Virakshitam Shuka Shiva Brahmadi Samanitam Shiradha Pada Sevanamritam Avota Datam Ishobhavanya. What Mahaprabhu came to give, you know, Jari Gorna Hoite Tabeki Hoite Kemane Doritam. This is what Mahaprabhu came to give, what was known intimately to Sarup Damodar, what was distributed by Rupa Goswami, tasted, adored by Sanatana Goswami, tasted by Raghunath, protected by Jiva Goswami, worshipped from afar by Shuka, Shiva, Brahma, that you can give. The divine nectarian service of the lotus feet of Srimati Radharani. You can give that. This is Bhakti Vinod Thakur. And this is his ultimate gift. Radha Dasyam. This is his ultimate gift. So who is Bhakti Vinod Thakur? Gurudev, Srila Maharaj, they also mention this incident when one day he's wandering in the sky, meditating on the name, and he comes across a group of the 12 Mahajans. Bali Maharaj is one of them. Some of you can remember better than me, but I think Lord Shiva is one. But these very great celebrated persons in the Vedic, line, they're puzzled about a verse in Bhagavad Gita. These verses in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which maybe we won't discuss now because it'll get too long. But they're puzzled on a point in Bhagavad Gita, and they see Bhakti Vinod Thakur, and Bhakti Vinod, he will know. So they're asking him, and Bhakti Vinod Thakur is explaining to them. So who's Bhakti Vinod Thakur? What the great devas are aspiring for and worshiping, bowing down to from a distance. He has that, he can give that. This is our line of gurus. So we are so, inconceivably, infinitely indebted to Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur. Such mercy, such magnanimity, such intense sacrifice he made, so that we can all have some touch of this. So we are remembering something, some touch of his glories. It's not possible to properly glorify him, but something we are remembering from what we've heard from our gurus, and we are praying for his mercy on this day. Jai Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur ki Jai, Nadi Shubha Avirbhav Mahamahotsav ki Jai. Very happy to be here with all of you. Suvasini Didi is also here with us. And Angela is here. Mahalakshmi. Is that Mahalakshmi from Singapore? Or maybe another one, I'm not sure.
It's she used to be Annie way back in the day.
One of your friends.
Yeah, and Krishna Sundar Das and her that whole crew.
Okay, we're very happy to have you with us. And also Griffin is here tuning in from Italy, and Kat, and Karan from Calcutta, Ananga Krishna. Is that Ananga Krishna from Tijuana? Maybe.
Yes, Vishakha.
Dandavad, Ananga Krishna Prabhu. Dear brother.
Yes,
I'm missing all of you in Tijuana.
We're missing you too, Vishakha. Are you coming soon?
That's a good question. I don't know. I might be in Hungary for the next 6 months. They just closed the borders in Hungary a few hours after I arrived.
Really?
It's crazy here.
Yeah, really, yeah. They're closing them on Tuesday tomorrow. But they announced a few hours after I arrived that they're closing them on Tuesday.
No.
So we'll see what happens if the flights are still running.
Yes.
And I think also Ananda Rupini is with us. Dandavad. Very happy to have from tuning in from London. Okay, well, really nice to spend this time with all of you. Does anyone want to add anything or ask anything, or should we conclude there for today?
Very beautiful. Thank you, Devi. Very good.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thanks for
you,
staying up late for us too.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not. It's only 8 o'clock. It's not so late.
That's kind of late my time.
Yeah, and actually, Brajarama, she's gonna drive. She has some drive. She's driving 2 hours to Budapest, so she's waiting. Okay, well,
I hope you can come.
Yes, I know. I'm supposed to go to Ireland. Devasity Didi is kindly bringing me there, but we'll see. Maybe we have to. I checked the flight. They haven't canceled the flight, but we just have to see if people cancel the booking, the flight's empty, then they'll probably cancel the flight. So, but I'll keep in touch with you,
Okay.
and let you know how things are going.
Yeah. I hope it will be possible.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Vishakha Devi Dasi ki.
Yeah.
Ah.
Jai Srila Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev Goswami Maharaj ki Jai. All the
Jai.
beautiful assembled devotees and sincere seekers ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Gaur Premanand.
Haribo.